we need to talk. There's been some things going on that I've noticed that at first I thought it was just a phase you were going through, so I tried to be patient, tried to make encouraging comments, but honestly it just kept getting worse. And I don't really know what to do anymore. I'm kind of at my wit's end, so I think it's time we had a nomenclature intervention. You see, one of the things is, by the time we're done nomenclature in this course, these are the topics that we've hit. And I'm not sure where we're at right now when you're watching this, but every single time we've done this, all we've done is we've added new things. We haven't really made a whole lot of changes. We haven't really undone anything that we've done in the past. We've just kind of added to it. And earlier, I gave you this flowchart of when you're dealing with a binary compound, which means two types of elements, how do you know what kind of nomenclature to do? And at that point, we were kind of 3 lessons deep. We had our simple metal, non-metal, where we don't use any Roman numerals and we don't use prefixes, but we cross over and reduce. We had our general metal, non-metal. That was our second lesson, where we used a Roman numeral to represent the charge on the metal. And then we had the non-metal, non-metal. And if you missed that, or you need a refresher, or if that's where you're going wrong, go back and have a look at that flowchart. You know, I can kind of give you a heads up as to where it is if you need it. But that represents your fundamentals of nomenclature. And everything we've done after that has been adding new layers, but a lot of it really comes back to mastering this. So you may have heard me say all previous nomenclature stays the same. And you might be wondering, what exactly does that mean? Let me clarify. It means all previous nomenclature stays the same. That's what it means. Okay, let's hit some of those things, those bad habits, those mistakes that we're making that we just can't seem to get out of anymore, and see if we can fix it. So right back at lesson number 1, we learned about spelling counts. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing is the spelling of sulfur, and I know that most words that have that kind of sounding, ending sound are spelled differently, but sulfur is not. And you also learned that P meant phosphorus, not potassium. It's one of the things we specifically highlighted in that lesson. And the problem is, more recently we've had it where some people are using P for phosphorus, and then a couple questions later use P for potassium. It's magical. Moving on though, when we get to other metals where we need to have some way to indicate charge, we have to indicate charge. The charges must be indicated. Now, we started out learning a Roman numeral system for doing that, and that still works. That Roman numeral only applies to the metal. It's only used for the metal because non-metals always have a reliable charge. So if you saw this compound, SnO2, it would be tin 4 oxide. No Roman numerals anywhere else, just the 4, and the 4 represents the charge on the tin. That's all the Roman numeral 4 does. Now, I know that later on in nomenclature we actually found another way of doing a similar kind of thing, but the bottom line remains we have to indicate the charge on the metal, and we only indicate the charge on the metal, but we have to indicate the charge on the metal one way or another. Non-metal nomenclature was actually a lot of people's favorite because it seemed to be the simplest thing going, and it is quite simple, but it's only appropriate for non-metals and non-metals. And what that means is, if you see a compound like this, tin 4 oxide, but if you see a compound like this, well, that's a non-metal, so I use prefixes, and it's sulfur trioxide. Now, some of you are thinking, yeah, but then later we changed it. No, we did not. Yeah, no, it's another name right now. We can call it something else. No, we can't. And at this point, some of you are thinking, oh, wait a second, but I've been doing that. I know you have been. And now you might be thinking, oh, that means that, yes, it does. That's exactly what it means. And I've been commenting every single time that you've done that the other thing you tried to call it is not appropriate, and it's only called sulfur trioxide. But I've been ignored. So here's what I'll do. I will put that question, or something similar to it, on every single nomenclature quiz we have from here to the end, and in some cases to the end of time, until everybody gets it right. So here's your chance. Now, when we moved on to the fourth one, it was really just a chance to take a bit of a pause and get the rest of our nomenclature mastered and add a couple of compounds, methane and ammonia. So maybe that's gone well, maybe it hasn't gone well for you, but lesson 4 was really just make sure you know those two by sight. Then we moved on to what I call Alchemist nomenclature, and there's probably a better name for it. It's not really an officially sanctioned type of nomenclature, but it is a fairly common one. So at this point, where we're at right now, you should probably be pretty comfortable with the charges of those elements and with the spellings of the names of those elements. If you're not, you really should be, but at this point, right, you have a periodic table, you have those charges. Spend some time with the periodic table and those charges labeling your periodic table for at least use on your own time. Then we got to polyatomic ions. And again, whenever you're watching this, you may or may not have seen polyatomic ions, so I'm not going to go into details of polyatomic ions at this point. But what I'd want to point out to you is that you have a polyatomic ion sheet. At least you should have a polyatomic ion sheet. If you don't, get one. Seriously, get the sheet. You're allowed to use it. You are encouraged to use it. It's better than some of the other options that I've seen people using. Most important thing you need to know, which is probably what I said about the polyatomic ion sheet, so we're going to go for a tie for most important thing, is that I will never give you half of a compound. Everything I give you on a nomenclature quiz and on a nomenclature sheet is going to be a full compound. And what that means is that if you see this compound, there's something similar to it on the polyatomic ion sheet, I know, but two things you need to know about this compound. One is it's not an ion. Two, I'm not going to give you half of a compound. If I want you to use the ion that looks kind of similar, that shall remain nameless, then I will put it in a compound where the charges are balanced, because that's how nomenclature works. Also, when you see a compound like this, when you're stuck and you hand me something like that, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not how we do nomenclature. That's not how you learned how to do nomenclature. That's not how we write that compound. However, I looked it up on Google and busted. Okay, at this point, there's a few things that we should be able to do. Number one, you've got a lot of practice pages. If you haven't done any of those practice pages, or haven't done much of those practice pages, or haven't done much nomenclature practice for a while, that's the thing we should probably be doing. However, get the polyatomic ion sheet. Really, it's not that hard. Maybe periodic table, because I have a feeling some of ours aren't using that periodic table very much either. And there are some things you can be labeling on it. Maybe not on a quiz, we'll let you know, but for at least your practice, so that you don't have to scramble around looking for things, that you don't have to say, oh, I'm not even going to bother, but so you have the resources that you need. Okay. I'm not going to say anything else about that. And I do hope we get to this point, because there are some things that have been repeating, mistakes have been repeated over and over, and I'm going to recommend that if you don't get a perfect score on a nomenclature quiz, go back and see where you went wrong, because I usually put the comments on it. After that, I don't know, it's a skill, it comes down to practice. It's about all we can do with it. Anyway, I'll see you another time. Oh, I think I pulled something.